Alright, good evening everyone, and welcome to a new series. I'm going to go ahead and call it Ben's Political Soapbox. And sorry, I'm just increasing the size of this, at least for this video. There we go. Hi. You can actually see me now. And I've actually turned off the volume on the background video and slowed it down just so that it'll last the entire thing. Whatever my whole spiel is going to wind up being, so I don't know. I wasn't planning on talking about what I'm going to talk about tonight, but I kind of have to address it because it kind of just broke, and let me exit out of that ad. Anyway, and that's impeachment, and yes, this is, yeah, so if you're wondering what I'm drinking, that's what I'm drinking, okay? And yes, it's actually a half liter. Anyway, I just opened it, so don't worry. I haven't had like 5. I did come from league bowling, but I don't drink when I'm bowling because I actually want to maintain my 200 average. Anyway, so we're going to talk a little bit about impeachment. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process. I'm going to talk about whether or not Donald Trump did anything wrong. I'm going to talk about my opinion on the history of impeachment, because that's important. And I'm going to talk a little bit about whether or not I think it's a good idea to launch an impeachment proceeding. And I'm going to talk a little bit about whether or not, if he is formally impeached, whether or not I think the Senate should convict, and whether or not, yeah, that basically means whether or not he's guilty, okay? Anyway, so let's start by talking about what impeachment is. Let's put this off to the side for now. So, impeachment is the process of formally drawing up charges on a sitting member of the U.S. government, particularly those of the executive and judicial branch. The traditional way of removing representatives and senators is through recall elections. Now that we have that out of the way, we can actually talk about the history of impeachment. So, this wasn't used until the 1860s with Andrew Johnson. And the reason Andrew Johnson was impeached was he violated the, I believe it was the Tenure of Office Act, or the Tenure in Office Act. Basically, Congress had passed a law, hilariously, over Andrew Johnson's veto that said that the president could not remove a member of the executive branch without the Senate's approval. Well, Andrew Johnson waited until the Senate wasn't in session and then removed a member of the executive branch. Yeah, exactly. Did he technically violate the law? Yeah, of course he did. But what was the purpose of the law? Well, it wasn't really to protect members of the executive branch that the Senate liked. It was instead, and I think there were quite a few Republicans who actually said so, that it was really just to trap Andrew Johnson and get him to commit a crime in order to remove him from office. Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what that was for. So, yes, they did, of course, catch him, and they did impeach him. And in the trial in the Senate, Republicans realized what they were doing, and he was acquitted on all charges. He was not removed from office. Because Republicans agreed, even though Johnson was technically, he wasn't really a Republican, but he also wasn't a Democrat. He was an independent, sort of, kind of. He was Lincoln's vice president, but he wasn't. He was part of some sort of weird unity ticket to, it's such a weird ticket that it really does deserve its own in-depth look the election of 1864, specifically Abraham Lincoln's re-election campaign. Anyway, they decided that the only reason they were bringing up impeachment charges was because they disagreed with Andrew Johnson and not because they had a legitimate reason to get him out of office. So, by a very slim margin, 1 vote, Republicans decided not to remove Andrew Johnson from office, which is probably a good thing. It set a very good precedent, in my opinion. And it showed that the Senate maybe had mellower, calmer heads on them than the House of Representatives did. And we're going to see in the other cases that the House always jumps first. Anyway. And yeah, I'm still kind of getting over whatever I had. It may have been... Basically, I think I've narrowed it down to either a small cold or tonsillitis. But anyway, moving back to the topic at hand. The next time we dealt with impeachment was in 1974 with Richard Milhouse Nixon. And what did he do? Well, he covered over recorded messages describing a break-in and essentially condoning a break-in at the DNC headquarters at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. While it wasn't officially endorsed by Nixon or even authorized by him, he didn't say no, and he also didn't say that they should be, barred from the party. He basically... Especially him and most of his top-level officials wound up not necessarily being 100% complicit, but complicit enough that it warranted impeachment and removal from office, because it really was that bad. It was 100% an abuse of power, but it was also tantamount to, honestly, what some dictators will do. Probably stuff that Putin does, let's be honest here. And now I'm a wanted man, and I'm probably going to find polonium or plutonium or whatever it is on my gas filler cap when I go to fill up my car in a few days. Anyway, yeah, so Richard Nixon definitely deserved to be impeached and removed from office, but he got ahead of the ball. He never was impeached. He was 100% going to be impeached and removed, but he resigned before that could happen. But that was the next time in American history that it got talked about. And that we're talking over 100 years. We're talking a little bit over 100 years, about 105, 106-ish years. Actually, it was closer to 108, if I remember correctly. 107 or 108. Yeah, that's a long time to not have to worry about impeachment. The next time was in the 90s. I believe it was 94. It was either... Yeah, I think it was in the 90s with Bill Clinton. And this was the whole Monica Lewinsky thing. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting one, because let's actually talk about this, okay? Because this is kind of an important step in the whole process of talking about impeachment. So, it came out that there was an affair between Bill Clinton and a White House intern by the name of Monica Lewinsky. Was it improper? Yes. Was it technically sexual assault? I would argue yes. Was it provable? Oh yeah, it was proven. Is that a crime? Yeah, it is. If it happened today, would there be any sympathy for the president? No. not at all. Would it be considered political if the parties were flipped? I wouldn't think so. But it was cast as political back in the 90s. It was cast as Republicans being dissatisfied with Bill Clinton. Oh yeah, did I mention that they also threw on perjury charges? Because Bill Clinton did actually commit perjury enough to get, I think he was disbarred, aka removed from the bar in Arkansas. Please, in the comments, correct me if I got the state wrong. But yeah. And it was not a good situation for either Bill Clinton or Republicans, because what it wound up being was a question of, does having an affair with an intern count as a high crime and misdemeanor? And is that something that is bad enough to remove from office? Well, let's go through the arguments. The first is, well, a high crime and a misdemeanor basically means an abuse of power and or treason, basically. Nepotism can also count, I suppose. It really depends on what you want to count and what you don't want to count as a high. And that's the thing. High crimes and misdemeanors, excluding the treason thing, is one of those where you could say, well, yeah, but that's subjective. That definition is subjective. So what is a high crime? What is a misdemeanor? And it has to be like high crimes and high misdemeanors and all that, because there's no commas, or, you know, the commas are weirdly placed and all that, and it's 18th century language and yada yada yada. Well, I would say an abuse of power counts as that, and I would argue that sexual assault should definitely count is a high crime or misdemeanor. I would argue it's a high felony, but that's beside the point. But why am I saying it's sexual assault? Well, it's because it is an abuse of power. I don't care if it was consensual, unless they were married. There's a slight difference. And married before he got into his position of power. And she was in a similar position before they got married. Basically, certain relationships can happen. Basically, it's like two military service members from different units meeting and marrying, right? That type of thing. That is perfectly fine. The problem was that Bill Clinton was the president and Monica Lewinsky was a White House intern. That's a considerable power gap between the two. And it's also not exactly prudent, I'll put it that much. And it brings up tons of other questions. For example, did he give out unreasonable favors? Did he offer promises? What was the other end of the bargain for him getting a little bit ahead? The other thing is, again, he's in a position of power taking advantage of someone for his own pleasure. You know, he's enjoying someone else playing the saxophone for once. And yeah, I'll go ahead and see myself out for that joke. Anyway, so those are some of the questions that were probably hovering around, and also, of course, the whole "I did not have sexual relations with that woman," that whole thing. Yeah, that was a whole perjury thing, because it was pretty clear he did. Yeah, he did. When a lawyer, when he's trying to get out of it by asking questions like, and there's a reason why people still joke about what the definition of is. Yeah. So, anyway, what is the whole this is where it gets really fuzzy, because you could make the argument that what he did was worthy of being removed from office. I would argue it was certainly impeachable, and I don't hold the Republicans in the House of Representatives to blame for deciding, yeah, this is definitely worthy of a trial in the Senate, which is what the impeachment process effectively is saying, well, we can't make the decision, but we think it's at least worthy of a trial. So they sent it on to the Senate, and the Senate acquitted, and it was a decent margin between him being convicted and acquitted. Like, there was a healthy margin. And I'm going to say that it was partially because I believe the Democrats held control of the Senate at the time. I may be incorrect about that. I didn't look at the official figures for it, but I do know that he was acquitted, and that was kind of the last anyone spoke of it. Anyway, so, yeah, that was something that happened. And now we're talking about now we're on to the newest impeachment issue, which was Donald Trump. So, based off of the history, when impeachment charges are brought up, they almost always go to the Senate. Actually, they have always gone to the Senate. Meaning, yeah, he's probably going to get impeached. But impeachment does not mean removal from office. As a matter of fact, no president has been removed from office. Again, if Nixon didn't resign, we would have seen that. And actually, I think it's a good thing that Nixon resigned. I actually had, when I was still in college, I had a professor who argued that Nixon should not have resigned so that we could see our constitutional processes in action. I disagree. I think it's good that Nixon resigned, because I think once we have a president removed from office, that's going to give every future Senate and every future House an excuse to remove a president from office, because it's happened before. People take precedent seriously. That's why so many people are horrified at even the thought of Roe v. Wade being repealed. It's why people were shocked at Heller. So, yeah, people take precedent seriously. And I think that Nixon being removed from office would have meant Bill Clinton was removed from office. It also probably means that Donald Trump would have gone through this whole process and been removed from office in 2018 rather than now. And I don't think it's a good look for a nation to just remove a president without a really, really good reason. So let's actually talk about what that reason is. Because beforehand, I've always asked, when I've heard, because, especially when I was on a college campus during the Trump presidency, right? Because, I've always commuted to classes. And my car has a few stickers on it. And somebody actually recognized it and was like, oh my God, you're a Republican? And I always say, well, I'm not technically a Republican. I disagree with them on a lot of key issues. If there's no one from my preferred party, the Libertarians, on the ballot in a race, I'll look at both candidates, but 90% of the time I'll vote for the Republican. If not, it's probably because I know the other person personally, or they don't disagree with me on one or two issues that I actually do care about. Because I do have some overlap with the Democrats. A significant amount of overlap, if I'm 100% honest. At least in terms of social issues. There are a few that I disagree with them on, obviously, but everybody is their own person. Anyway, point is, they would always go, So what do you think about Donald Trump? Do you think he should be impeached? Because I think he should. I say, okay, so why? What has he done that is a high crime or a misdemeanor? I'll go ahead and list about 3 or 4, maybe 5 things that I've heard that people think are impeachable offenses. The first one that I always heard was, well, he's a racist. Okay, then Woodrow Wilson should have been impeached and removed from office. I think he should have, but not because he was a racist. Because he was a terrible president. And that's beyond the whole he was a racist thing. And that's... Just look up some of the bullshit that Wilson pulled and you'll kind of get where I'm coming from. Honestly, I actually heard, I believe it was a cynical historian, and I think Alternate History Hub did a collab video on Woodrow Wilson, and they almost made me consider putting Wilson as the worst president in U.S. history. That's how bad some of the things he did was. It actually made me consider that maybe he was worse than Buchanan. And that's kind of impressive, if we're honest. That's kind of impressive. So, moving on to the next one. Because he's sexist. Read the whole because he was racist thing. Because there were plenty of sexist presidents as well. And plenty of presidents who were well-known womanizers. Let's put it that way. Slick Willie is one of them. Then there's but he's homophobic. Again, read the others. But then again, let's pump the brakes on those. I'm a straight white male. Maybe I'm the wrong person to talk about those 3 issues. At least, according to Democrats, I definitely am the wrong person to talk about those 3 issues. Ignoring the fact that my heritage is French-Polish, which, let's be honest, they've gotten the brunt of, well, the primary white Europeans, aka the Brits and the Germans. Yeah, France and Poland have never fared well in the stage of Europe, except not really, because France is actually one of the more successful military nations in the world, but everybody just says, meh. Well, you had the surrender flag as your national flag at one point. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, so moving on to the 4th reason, and these are the ones where I get to the kind of real issues. The whole campaign controversy where he supposedly asked Russia to investigate Hillary Clinton. Did he? Kind of. If you count sarcastic jokes as actual communication, when I say actual communication, I mean, actual serious conversation or requests. Yeah, it was clearly sarcastic, and I should know sarcasm is my native language. It's totally not English. Why would anybody think English is my native language? I don't get it. Actually, I'm just kidding. Southern is my first language. Sarcasm is my second. Yeah. But I can see why people would consider it not a good look. Because it is definitely improper. It can definitely be misinterpreted because sarcasm is never properly understood. And because the topic of the joke was really not something that you should be joking about, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I can at least see that argument. It's highly improper, but then again, I have a sense of humor, but then again, I can also separate things that should be joked about with things that shouldn't. And I have a very dark sense of humor. And I'm not going to explain how dark it gets sometimes, but if you ever play Cards Against Humanity with me, typically the darkest response was mine. So yeah, And when I say the darkest response, I mean the darkest response. Yeah. I have a very macabre sense of humor. Anyway, so the next issue that I always hear is because he was trying to divert emergency funds or military defense funds to build the wall. Well, you can make justifications that, yes, there was an emergency down there and maybe a wall would have been a solution. Of course, would it be wrong? I personally would agree, but there are people who would disagree, and we would have our reasons. And that's something you can't 100% determine. Therefore, and since it's technically serving an emergency purpose, at least in the eyes of, at least half the people, meaning you're at an impasse and we don't actually know, well, that's not really impeachable. In defense, well, technically it's in the defense of the nation, but is it an effective defense? Probably not, but then again, neither was Star Wars. Strategic Defense Initiative. Or was it this? Just look up the Star Wars program under the Reagan administration. Pretty much space lasers to shoot down nukes. That's what Star Wars was. I'm not kidding there. But yeah, this was basically, personally, I think it would have been the same. Personally, I think that the wall is the equivalent of Star Wars in terms of border security, but hey, technically it's for national security, and that's one of the reasons why we have the Defense Department. So, yeah, you could. Yeah, I don't see how that's. I don't see how that's impeachable. So, the other one, the funniest one I heard. The government shutdown is an impeachable offense because he shut down the government is not doing his job. No, his job is to execute the laws of the nation. That's literally the job description of the president, is to preside over the laws. Not to judge them. That's the judicial branch. That's the Supreme Court. We're talking about the executive branch, the executive, to execute, to carry out the law. So, yes, the government shutdown was not good for a lot of people. However, again, grain of salt, I personally am of the opinion that the less government does, the better. But that does not mean that I am 100% correct. Also, by the way, for the Soapbox series, I know I should have stated this at the beginning. Remember, these are my opinions unless I'm talking about historical fact, and I will always make sure that I mention it's historical fact, and that's outside of it. But the majority of my soapbox is all opinion. And if I disagree with you, that doesn't mean that you're wrong. That also doesn't mean that I'm wrong. It's an opinion. It means we're free to have ours. You can have yours too. And if you express it politely in the comments, I'll probably respond politely as well. If you respond like a dick, well, rule number 1 of my channel is don't be an asshole. So if you're an asshole in the comments, well, bye-bye. Or, as one of my exes would say, bye, Felicia. Anyway. So, yeah, no. The government shutdown is not an impeachable offense because that's not a violation of his constitutional duties. It's a failure of the House and the Senate to agree on something, as well as failure of the House and the Senate to agree on something and then override a presidential veto if that happened, or allow the president to sign it into law, Because Congress are the only ones who have 100% control of the budget. The president just has to spend what Congress tells him to spend and carry out the taxes that he's required to. And I'm actually going to start this over, so ha ha ha. Anyway. So that's kind of that. But now this Ukraine thing. Is that impeachable? Well, we don't have the transcripts. Supposedly, he asked the Ukrainian president to pipeline it down to their intelligence and investigate Joe Biden's son. If that's actually what happened, number one, yes, that's impeachable. Because it's asking a foreign government to investigate or maybe do something else to an American citizen. Yeah, that's impeachable. It's also technically treason, and you can be removed from office for that. Yeah. If he actually did it, I would not only support impeachment, but I would support removal from office. However, if it's not that clear, well, it depends. Is it clear enough that it would stand up in a normal court of law for an average citizen? Okay, then maybe I would support it. Probably I would support it, because if it's that clear, well, he may as well have gone out and said it. However, if it's just kind of discussing, shooting the shit, aka like me and my buddies do while we're bowling, about, well, I don't want to say nothing bad, but I heard this person, I think they enjoy too much pain. aka saying that, well, I don't want to say anything, but I've heard that they use narcotics or whatever. I don't want to say anything bad, but she always had some problems, and that's why she could never attend church. Or something like that. It's not really gossip. It's gossip, but it's not really doing anything definitive. It's kind of just saying, again, shooting the shit. But that's kind of one of those things. If it is there and the Democrats are impeaching her for this, that's going to hurt them significantly, because it's going to wind up coming back to them saying, you impeached a sitting president because he made a joke, or you impeached a sitting president because you can't differentiate between a conversation that doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things because you want to jump to conclusions. And I'm worried that that's actually what it is. I'm going to wait until we have the full transcripts, because I don't think it's fair to make a decision and form an opinion before you have all the information, or as much information as you can humanly get, because I think that's just imprudent and leaves you open to, well, I'm not going to say being wrong, but it leaves you open to the possibility of making a decision too quickly, jumping to conclusions, and acting too hastily. I think the impeachment proceedings are too soon. They should have just subpoenaed the transcripts and then made a decision. But this is also the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives kind of jumps to conclusions all the time because, well, it's the House of Representatives. Doesn't matter if it's Republican, doesn't matter if it's Democrat. The House is kind of a reactionary body. But yeah, so there's that whole thing. And I'm going to try and wrap this up. I'm going to pretty much say I want to wait until we get an actual transcript to form an opinion. I recommend all y'all do the same. Other than that, I'm going to go ahead and say take it easy, y'all. Have a nice evening, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.